She works with states on the implementation of their international legal obligation arising from the Biological Weapon Convention, Chemical Weapon Convention, UN Security Council Resolution 1540, and the agreement related to nuclear security. Suzanna completed an LLM in Public International Law at the University College, London, where she focused her dissertation on international law's facilitation of convention weapons transfer. She holds an undergraduate degree in political science from McGill University, Canada, a graduate diploma in law from College of Law, London. Previously, Suzanna worked as a program officer for the Transparency International Secretariat in Berlin, coordinating a global anti-corruption advocacy program. She also has worked and volunteered for non-profit organizations in Paris and Montreal, Canada, as well as in the private legal sector in London and Bahrain. Ms. Suzanna Kushabi will be speaking to us on the topic, understanding the strategic roles NGO plays in the implementation of Biological Weapon Convention, BWC, in Africa. Ms. Kushabi.
Good morning.
Good morning. You have the floor, please.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you very much to the GET Consortium and Afrixis for the invitation to speak today. So my name is Suzanna Kushabi. I work at VERTIC, and I'll be speaking on the topic, understanding the strategic roles that NGOs play in the implementation of the BWC in Africa. So first of all, I'll just try to share my screen because I have some slides. One moment. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, bear with me, technical difficulty. Okay. So you should, hopefully now we'll be able to see my slides. Okay. So as was just mentioned, I'm an associate legal officer with VERTIC. VERTIC is a NGO working on the implementation, compliance with, and verification of international agreements. We are based in the UK, but we work globally on these issues. And I work specifically within a team called the National Implementation Measures Program. So we work specifically on providing assistance to states with their implementation of international instruments relating to chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. So I'll be using VERTIC's experience as an NGO working on national implementation to approach the topic today, explaining specifically what strategies we've used and the work that we've done, and then placing this within the wider framework of the role that NGOs play in advancing implementation of the BWC in Africa. So hopefully you can now see my outline. So first of all, I'll just very briefly cover the basics of the background of what national implementation is. Then I'll move on to the role that NGOs play in advancing national implementation. I'll then look specifically at VERTIC's national implementation assistance and our work with African states. Then I'll turn to the strengths of NGOs as assistance providers in this area and some best practices and strategies for legislative assistance for national implementation of the BWC. So when we discuss national implementation, the definition that I'm working with today is that it's a process by which a state adopts appropriate and effective national legislative, regulatory, and other measures to carry out its international obligations in a treaty or in an international instrument such as a resolution, which contains binding decisions. So that would be, for example, UN Security Council Resolution 1540, and an international treaty. Today's topic would be the Biological Weapons Convention. And it's worth stopping here just to clarify that I'll be focusing on legislative implementation as within the VERTIC NIM team. This is what we work on, but there are other non-legislative aspects of implementation that are equally important, such as practical measures, for example, border control trainings. But for today, we'll be talking about legislative implementation. So within the BWC specifically, states parties are obligated to introduce measures to implement its provisions into their national legal frameworks. This is mentioned within the BWC text in Article 4, where it says that each state party shall, in accordance with its constitutional processes, take any necessary measures to prohibit and prevent the development, production, stockpiling, acquisition, or retention of the agents, weapons, equipments, and means of delivery specified in Article 1 of the Convention. This obligation was reiterated, for example, in the 8th Review Conference to the BWC in the final document, which again called on states parties to adopt legislative, administrative, judicial, and other measures to implement the BWC. So before I go into the specifics of VERTIC's experience within national implementation, I wanted to note the general roles that NGOs play in treaty implementation within the BWC. So first of all, when we're discussing NGOs, it's also worth bearing in mind the wider group of civil society, which includes a range of actors such as academia, research institutions, professional or industry associations, individual experts, and so on. So this NGOs and this wider group, they participate with treaty processes in a number of ways. So this includes by contributing their technical expertise, advocating for specific issues, engaging with stakeholders, raising awareness or sharing knowledge. They provide trainings on a range of subjects that are relevant to the treaty, and they also provide assistance to states and other groups. So VERTIC specifically works on national implementation of the BWC through legislative assistance. And we do this in 3 key ways that I'll explain in more detail. So this is, first of all, awareness raising. We also work on legislative analysis, and finally, legislative drafting. So the first form of assistance that we offer when it comes to implementation of the BWC is activities that raise awareness of a state's obligations under the BWC, as well as their related obligations under UN Security Council Resolution 1540. So states may want to know more about, for example, what kinds of measures they should consider to implement the BWC, what type of legislation they could introduce, for example, a single law to implement the BWC or amendments to several existing laws that they already have. And so in this area, VERTIC have experience conducting workshops and giving presentations explaining these implementation obligations. And we also, in these workshops, aim to engage the relevant stakeholders, for example, government actors working in fields such as defense or biosecurity, disarmament, and national and public health. We conduct these workshops either online or in person, or we could do a mixed approach of both online and in person. And then, of course, we also have tools and publications that are designed at raising awareness as well of national implementation. So we have fact sheets. These are available on our website in several languages on the Biological Weapons Convention, on UN Security Council Resolution 1540, the WHO International Health Regulations, and others. We publish regular briefs and reports on specific issues that relate to the BWC. For example, we just recently, last month, published a report on addressing misconceptions about biological and chemical weapons and related legal frameworks. So we draw on all these tools in our workshops as well, but states are also free to use them through our website. The next key activity that we do for national implementation is legal analysis. So this consists of conducting country-specific assessments of BWC implementing legislation through a survey. We use a template that we've developed in-house at VERTIC in the NIM team, survey legislation template. This is also available online on the VERTIC website, by the way, in English, French, Spanish, and other languages soon to come. So the template contains 137 distinct measures that states could include in their national legislation to implement the BWC. So it contains all these measures, and then it also has fields to then compare what measures a state already has that correspond to these international provisions. And we would look in a state's legislation, in their regulations, and other measures to assess the implementation. Amongst these 137 measures, we include related provisions from other relevant international instruments. So not only Resolution 1540, but for example, some biological weapons related provisions in aviation treaties or anti-terrorism treaties, which also contains some aspects of biological weapons. So we would also, it's important to say, we often work with national experts to create these surveys and to do this research. And what the result is a clear gap analysis where states can then use this to draw upon actionable recommendations to improve their national legal frameworks. So this activity altogether helps to advance implementation of the BWC by looking at what's already there and seeing what else needs to be done. The third type of activity that we do is legislative drafting. So we work with states to draft legislation or regulations to implement the BWC. We do this through drafting workshops where we would draft legislation and regulations, as I said. We would review existing bills. That's another activity we could do with a view to drafting amendments, for example. And we can also assist with drafting related documents such as explanatory notes to bills or research memoranda. And we would typically work with our national contacts within the state to organize a small group of relevant national experts to engage in this drafting activity over the course of a 2 or 3 day workshop. We would then also, importantly, come up with a legislative action plan to outline the next steps. So drafting of legislation is one of the key ways that we as an NGO work on national implementation of the BWC. In our workshops and also just generally, again, we have tools that are freely available online. We have a model law for national implementation of the BWC. We actually are in the process of revising this and are hoping to release it this week, the new revision. This will be also then made available. It's primarily going to be in English, but then it will be made available in French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian. We have a BWC legislation database This is also on our website that you can go to, and it is country by country a collection of their laws that relate to implementing the BWC. So anyone interested can look at what other countries have already done to implement BWC. And finally, we have an online legislative drafting assistant. So on this slide, I've highlighted just some of the work that VERTIC has done in the past 5+ years with states in Africa on implementing the BWC. Although, as you can see here, we have had several projects with a wide range of countries on the continent working on implementation of the BWC and also the CWC. We also have completed legislation surveys, the ones that I mentioned, for 47 states in Africa to date. So if I went into a bit more detail, just a few of the activities that we've done recently. We worked with Botswana on legislative analysis, so doing a legislation survey and legislative drafting. So we worked with a national expert to conduct assessment of the current status of BWC implementing legislation in Botswana. We organized a workshop on legislative drafting as a follow-up to this. So this was done with VERTIC joining from London and Botswana gathering experts in person in Botswana. And we're providing ongoing remote drafting support as needed. VERTIC also attended the Regional Women's Conference on preventing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction to non-state actors last year in Ethiopia. So that was organized by the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs and the government of Namibia. And VERTIC spoke specifically on UN Security Council Resolution 1540 and export controls in Africa. In 2021, we also worked with the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to review their draft biosecurity and biosafety legal framework. So we provided feedback on this. So those are just 3 activities in the last year or 2 that we've done. So, sorry, 1 moment, my screen is frozen. Okay, so what I've been covering so far is that VERTIC has a range of experience working on national implementation of the BWC. And because of this, we've gained an understanding through our work and through feedback of the strengths that NGOs possess as assistance providers in this field. So particularly within the BWC space, NGOs offer technical expertise on specific subjects. So whether this is legislative implementation or historical research or expertise within biosafety and biosecurity or other topics. They also provide important source of knowledge and information, which is often freely available through their research and their publications. So this in turn helps to generate new resources and new perspectives on both ongoing and emerging issues. They're also able to sometimes work across different regimes and instruments. So, for example, not only the Biological Weapons Convention, but the Chemical Weapons Convention, maybe at the same time, due to the fact that NGOs are often by nature more flexible in their organization and are able to act flexibly. Finally, they have a strength and they're an important vehicle in that they connect different audiences. So ranging from other NGOs and civil society actors to international organizations or states. So because of this, the events that they hold or participate in, such as this one, for example, are an important way to engage a diverse range of stakeholders on an issue. So I wanted to finish with some of the best practices and strategies that we have learned through our work with VERTIC, specifically when it comes to implementation of the BWC. So a good starting point is to start with a review of the existing legal framework, as I mentioned. So this is needed to know what is already covered and the status of implementation of the BWC in a state. And this helps to identify the way forward. So a second point would be that NGOs and any other assistance providers should work with states to ensure that assistance is tailored specifically to each state's national context, to their unique needs and their legal system. And another strategy is that they should involve all relevant stakeholders at the key stages in the process of national implementation. BWC implementation affects such a wide range of industry sectors, so there's a need to involve a wide range of stakeholders throughout the implementation process. For example, even just within government agencies, you would have potentially government agencies that deal with customs and border control, health, foreign affairs, defense, justice, and so on. So it's important to involve all of these actors. Then next, NGOs have an important role to play in raising awareness among and within states on the benefits and importance of national legislation and national implementation. So this can help to generate support for legislation or give it momentum. We've also found that there's varying levels of awareness within governments of their international obligations. So raising awareness is always helpful. So I've already mentioned this a bit already, but tools and assistance. This is a really key way that NGOs can contribute to the information that is out there regarding the BWC and assist with national implementation through contributing their expertise. And my next point also ties in earlier to what I was saying somewhat, but NGOs can provide a range of international and regional assistance and collaboration, for example, by working with a range of partners, so international organizations, other NGOs, regional organizations, and other initiatives. Then another key strategy for NGOs when it comes to national implementation is to strive for assistance that is sustained over a longer period of time. The same goes for communication in general. It should be ongoing if possible, rather than focused on one specific initiative or event. Implementing legislation and national implementation in general is a long process that can take years. And another good practice in this area is NGOs coordinating with states when there are multiple assistance providers working on one effort, or perhaps working together in a sequence. And then to also help with sustainability, to involve national experts and actors as much as possible within this process. And the last point on strategies for implementation that I wanted to share was that NGOs and states should consider the links with other relevant international treaties when they work on BWC national implementation. They may find it easier to, or that it makes more sense to tackle the implementation of several treaties at once, as some of them can overlap. NGOs can often be well placed to work on cross-cutting issues and to highlight these links. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much again. And if you have any questions, please either put them in the chat or in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Koshabi. Thank you for that very comprehensive and